Hello, everybody. My name is Ratnos, and today we are going to talk about the Race to World First, mostly, and a little bit other guilds and stuff, and other normal play patterns and cases. But this is mostly going to be about loot splits and optimization and changes with 10.1 in the upcoming Race to World First as a result of this change here, this gear trading time limit change. So feel free to click off if you are not at all interested in Race to World First. But I am, and I think it's cool to talk about and fun to think about. So let's talk about what's happening with the change. So PTR 10.1 is including a change to gear trading, increasing the time limit to 4 hours, but making the timer count down while offline. This used to be 2 hours, and it used to not change, not decrease, right? The timer would freeze while you were offline, which was abused by Race to World First guilds in Vault of the Incarnates to do some pretty degenerate stuff with their splits. So if you aren't familiar with this, let me walk you through what the Vault of the Incarnates strategy was. You would have like 9 splits, mostly including each player playing 9 copies of the same class, right? So if I was a Moonkin player, which I would never be, but if I was, I would have 9 Moonkins in these raids. Tank players would usually have maybe it wouldn't be straight up 9 Prot Warriors or whatever, but it would be like 7 of the spec they thought they were going to main, probably Prot Warrior, and like 1 DK and 1 Brewmaster or something, right? Like they would have like a couple of alts thrown in there. Healers also would, depending on how likely they were, right? If anybody was like 100% to just be playing one class or spec, all of their characters would be that. And there was still a little bit of alts being prepared. There was still some multi-classing, but the Race World First has moved a little bit away from having. It kind of used to be that, you know, if we were doing 9 splits, I would be playing 9 different classes across those, or like 6 different classes and 4 copies of my main or something. But now it's like 9 copies of people's main were being played in these splits, because what you would do is you would do the split. You would get it done under 2 hours, so you would kill all the heroic bosses under 2 hours, and you wouldn't hand out any loot. You would trade all of that loot to one character, to one, like, confirmed alt, one character that... Actually, it doesn't even have to be a confirmed alt. It could end up being a main later, but something that was probably likely to be an alt, something that you wouldn't want to be logged into and doing M+ or whatever. So, and you would just log that character out and leave that character logged out and then go do another split. And you would do all of your splits this way. You would mark down all of the loot that dropped into a spreadsheet. And then you would look at that spreadsheet and you'd be like, okay, well, this run dropped 4 Zenith tokens, so we can make a Zenith main out of this run, because we can give them 4-piece, right? And it also dropped these very rare items, and it dropped these trinkets. And you would look at that and you'd be like, okay, this character, or this person's main is going to be this character. We're going to hand it all the gear that it wants from this run. And this person's main is going to be this character. We're going to hand it all the gear it wants from this run. You would figure that all out looking at the spreadsheet. Then you would have those characters log in and trade to each other before the 2 hours and the offline time has expired. Now, obviously, that's no longer going to be possible because the timer is going to tick down while you're offline. So what are Race to World First guilds going to do to counteract this? Well, first of all, I don't know. I'm not a Race to World First player. But if I had to guess, I would say there's still likely to be some amount of degeneracy. There's always degeneracy, right? That's the thing. That's the joy of Race to World First, is there's always some kind of degeneracy. It's not going to be the exact same way. Instead, there's going to be a little bit more of an element of gambling, right? Where you're going to run the splits, and hopefully you don't get like a 4 Zenith run after another 4 Zenith run where you've already given the gear to the person that like the good very rares in that run have dropped to, or something like that. If that happens, you know, your characters are going to suck a little bit more than if you get the loot to drop in a more fortunate setup. But there is still some element for cheesing with this, because the time window going up to 4 hours, hypothetically, what you could do, and what I suspect guilds might end up doing with this, is... So you go into Heroic, you clear all the bosses that don't drop tier. It's tough because like the very first boss, I think, has a very rare item that maybe means you can't. But like, let's say you don't care as much about that or where that goes to. And instead, so you set up like 3 Heroic raids where you've cleared all the bosses that don't drop tier, and you just have like 5 or 6 tier bosses or whatever ahead of you. And now the question is, how many of those runs can you do in 4 hours with enough time to still do some trades afterwards, and enough time to cleanly run those spreadsheets and do the calculations? You can have the people doing the spreadsheets and doing the math be outside the raid. Both Liquid and Echo, have like analysts that are able to look at this and be doing that during the 4 hours while raids are ongoing. So what I think you'll see is probably 2 or maybe 3 heroic runs finish before loot from that first heroic run is actually handed out. And you can still get some value out of knowing what you're getting from future splits before you hand out loot from the first split. But it's going to be a lot less, and that's very risky because if you screw up and the 4-hour window passes, right, like, it's over. So you've got this loot just sitting on a character that it's not supposed to be on. So maybe you like trade it. Maybe you just preemptively trade it to the person you think it's most likely to go on, and then they, trade it to somebody else if they realize something else is going to be their main from a future split. I'm not sure. Either way, that's going to be the impact, I think, on Race to World First here. There's still going to be a lot of splits. It's still largely going to be mirror characters rather than people having a bunch of different alts of different types. And the goal is going to be, okay, hopefully we get enough runs that drop 4 Zenith tokens that I'll be able to set up a character. The thing is, in Echoes of Embers of Neltharion, Echoes of Neltharion, whatever, the new patch, in Aberrus, there's so much more tier that I think that this is going to be hugely offset. Like, if this change had happened and it was just for Vault, I would be a little bit worried that we'd be having some of the like week 1 race stuff kind of determined by which guild ended up getting good RNG or bad RNG here. But you get 1 Omni token guaranteed by just clearing the heroic raid, right? I'm not talking. There's one that just gets assigned to every single character. Every single character gets one for getting an achievement for clearing the raid on heroic, or for getting like 2.2k in M+, or 1.8k in PvP. But we'll assume that Race World First Raiders are going to get it from AOTC. And so that means they now only need 3 pieces of tier to be assigned to them from the raid. And there's extra tier dropping from the raid as well, because the last boss drops bonus Omni tokens of its difficulty. So I think you're still going to see everybody get characters with 4-piece out of the raid from heroic. I actually don't think Race to World First guilds are going to need to go into normal at all. Normal will be a useful tool for guilds that aren't running splits to get good. I mean, it's great value. Normal is great value next tier. I just don't think you need to do it if you're in a Race to World First guild with splits. And yeah, the question is going to come down to the very rare items. You're going to be really crossing your fingers that very rare items drop lined up with classes that can use them that haven't already been assigned to, like, so you want, say there's a very rare item that's like the Warlock trinket, right? The trinket that you're pretty sure is going to go to your Warlocks. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to hopefully not make any Warlocks into mains until one of those trinkets also drops in that run, and then you can assign them the tier and that trinket, and they'll be really powerful. What you're hoping to avoid is a situation where the very rare items that are good for certain specs and the tier that links up with those specs drop in different runs from each other. That's going to be the kind of RNG fail case. Or alternatively, the case of like, okay, the Warlock item dropped and all the tier dropped, but our Warlocks have already been made mains in earlier runs. So you're going to kind of plan out to try and minimize the chances of that happening. Now, if all this sounded completely foreign to you, and this just sounds ridiculous, well, that's kind of Race to World First for you. That's Race to World First gear and trading and stuff. But if you're complaining about this change for whatever reason, let me just say, for most players, this is going to be a nice upgrade. For most guilds, that offline time, like there was very little abuse of that old mechanic that you can look at it and be like, oh no, they've nerfed us. It was starting to become a thing. I've heard there were some guilds that were using it even in Vault that were, just doing 1 or 2 splits even and sitting on these items. But if you weren't doing splits like to that extent, there wasn't too much value in sitting on these items like this. And also you needed your clear to be under 2 hours really to be taking advantage of it. And that was not true of a lot of guilds that weren't at the very tippy top anyways in the first few weeks on Heroic. So for most guilds, then it's going to just be nice because like, oh, if I forget to assign my loot from the first boss, or if I regret where the loot went from the first boss, and now we're on the last boss, well, we can still trade it because it's been within 4 hours rather than within 2 hours. So that is I think that for most guilds, it's going to be a nice quality of life change. And it also means that usually when there's some degenerate stuff like this holding gear on an offline character thing, it happens first in the Race to World First, and then it does trickle down to lower guilds and lower every tier because people keep getting better and better at figuring out how to do it. Tools become available to make it easier, and kind of the strategy gets disseminated. But Blizzard's kind of nipped that in the bud here, and because my guild, we didn't do this in Vault. we maybe would have in Aberrus if it had been still allowed. You know, it's something we would have talked about and tried to theorize if this is worth our time and effort to set up. And I'm not sure what the answer would have been, but I'm glad that Blizzard has nipped it in the bud, because obviously that pattern is pretty degenerate. And the rule of thumb for me for Race to World First is, if there's some degenerate stuff happening in Race to World First, and you can fix it without impacting normal players, you should. A lot of the degenerate stuff in Race to World First you can't fix without impacting normal players, and so you should leave those things. But especially when there's something like this that is threatening to trickle down to more guilds, I think it was a no-brainer. This is one of those fixes where I hadn't thought of it, but when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is brilliant. This is a good change. So that is a change to loot coming with patch 10.1. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.